Imagine one parking ticket that doesn't just spoil a morning, it dents a lifetime. Providence District Court hummed its weekday music, wooden benches sighing, muffled voices, the scrape of a chair pushed too far. Dust drifted in slanted light from the high windows. Judge Frank Caprio, steady and unhurried, flipped to the next case with that familiar, human half-smile. Ellen Mercer, the clerk called. A woman of about 68 stepped forward, neat blouse, thrift store coat, a tremor she tried to hide by clasping her hands. Her voice was careful, as if loudness might break something. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Good morning, Mrs. Mercer," Caprio said. "Citation for parking in a veterans-only space." Her chin lifted, then faltered. "I didn't know it was reserved, sir. I stopped for a few minutes to bring medicine to my neighbor. She's not well." "The sign was posted?" he asked, tone neutral. A silence that wasn't quite denial. "Yes. I saw it. But the space was empty. I thought, no one would be hurt." A soft, uncomfortable murmur drifted from the benches. Someone folded a newspaper with a crisp snap, someone else cleared a throat and regretted it. Caprio nodded, no scolding, just listening. He turned the paper over, glanced at the photo of the sign attached to the ticket. Behind it, the seal of a small brass plaque gleamed in the snapshot. His eyes shifted to the front row. A man had stood, lean frame, close-cropped gray hair, the stiff shoulders of old habit. He wore a field jacket, a small bar of ribbon above the pocket. He held a medal in his right hand, not flaunted, simply present. "Your Honor," he said, voice low but clear, "that space is mine." The room stilled, like a breath held. Caprio raised a palm, bringing the murmurs down to nothing. "Please," the judge said. "Your name?" "Thomas Reeves, United States Marine Corps, retired. The city put my name on that marker 3 years back. I use it on clinic days." He looked at Ellen, and there was no hardness in it. "I was headed there this morning. I didn't want her punished. I wanted her to know." Ellen's fingers tightened around each other, whitening at the knuckles. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't mean disrespect. I was rushing. My neighbor, she'd run out of pills." Caprio watched them both, the veteran standing without anger, the woman bracing against shame. He closed the file gently, as if not to startle the moment. "In this courtroom," he said, his voice softened by years rather than volume, "we measure more than lines of paint. We measure what people carry when they cross them." Ellen swallowed. "I thought 5 minutes would be harmless." "Harmless is a word that usually belongs to the person taking the space," Caprio replied, still mild. Across the gallery, benches whispered, bodies resettling. No outrage now, interest, yes, and a quiet that felt like respect. Caprio leaned back, eyes thoughtful. The routine had slipped out of the room. In its place stood 3 lives, 1 judge, 1 former nurse, 1 Marine, balanced on a patch of asphalt and a plaque with a name. "Let's slow down," he said. "Mrs. Mercer, tell me not where you parked, tell me why you couldn't see the sign." She looked up, startled by the question that wasn't in the paperwork. For a heartbeat, the tremor left her hands. Something unnamed crossed her face, fatigue, maybe, the stubborn dignity of a person who has done without applause. The judge waited. The veteran waited. And the small thing that had started like a ticket grew suddenly larger, as if the room itself understood it might be deciding more than a fine. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel." Judge Caprio studied the woman before him, steady eyes, patient hands resting on the bench. "Mrs. Mercer," he said quietly, "tell me what brought you there that morning. Not where you parked, why?" Ellen hesitated, glancing at the veteran still standing in the first row. Her voice cracked. "There isn't much to tell. I was taking medicine to my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan. She's 86, had a stroke last spring. Her oxygen tank failed, and I was the closest one she could reach." Caprio leaned forward. So you stopped in the veteran space because it was the nearest. I didn't think, she admitted. When she called, she could barely speak. I just grabbed the bag and drove. When I came out, there was the ticket. I didn't even argue. I figured that was fair. The judge nodded slowly, the way he did when words meant more than facts. And what do you do, Mrs. Mercer? I used to be a school nurse, she said, almost proudly, then smiled at her own past tense. Now I help out at the community clinic. Some days they pay me, some days they don't. Do you live alone? Her shoulders lifted in a small shrug. With my son. Though most nights he's not really home. Something in her tone drew the veteran's attention. Thomas Reeves shifted his weight, frowning. Caprio didn't press her, he'd learned long ago that some truths needed air before questions. He turned instead to the veteran. Mr. Reeves, you said you didn't want her punished. Why? Reeves rubbed the edge of the metal between his thumb and forefinger. Because she reminds me of someone, Judge. Someone who used to patch us up overseas. Same eyes. Same tired grace. His voice caught for half a second, the sound of memory biting through composure. The sign means respect. But so does mercy. The courtroom was silent but alive, people listening, breathing slower. Ellen swallowed hard. I didn't mean to offend your service, sir. My brother was Army. Korea. He used to say the hardest part of coming home was remembering how to ask for help. Reeves met her eyes. He was right. Caprio watched the exchange, hands folded on the bench. He had presided over hundreds of these hearings, tickets, tolls, forgotten meters, but rarely one that felt like a conversation between decades. Finally he spoke, his tone half thought, half verdict. Laws tell us what not to do. Stories tell us why we still care. He paused, letting that settle. Mrs. Mercer, what would you like me to know before I make a decision? She hesitated, then exhaled. I'd like you to know I didn't stop there out of convenience. I stopped because when someone calls for help, I don't look at signs. The veteran's hand clenched around the metal, then loosened. Caprio leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment but reflection. You remind me, he said, that compassion and disobedience sometimes look alike from a distance. He turned to the clerk. Let the record show both parties have spoken with respect. Then, softly, almost to himself, and that sometimes, in this room, understanding arrives before the verdict. No one moved. Even the sound of paper ceased. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't a courtroom, it was a space between two acts of decency, waiting to decide which one mattered more. Judge Caprio sat very still. He didn't reach for the file this time, he just looked at Ellen Mercer. The quiet in the courtroom was a kind of pressure, not tense, not hostile, but full. Mrs. Mercer, he said finally, I looked at your record. You've had tickets before, haven't you? Her head dropped slightly. Yes, Your Honor. A few. How many? 3. She hesitated, then added, 4. He nodded. All in the same area? Yes, she whispered. Same vehicle? Yes. He glanced down, then spoke softly, and each time, you didn't pay. She bit her lip. I couldn't, sir. He didn't ask why. He already knew what the answer would be. Instead, he said, you understand that, by law, ignoring these tickets could result in a suspension. She looked up, eyes red but dry. I understand. But sometimes it's a choice, Judge. Dinner for my son, or the city's fine. I guess I chose dinner. That quiet spread again, the kind that makes you aware of every movement in the room. The judge shifted the papers aside and leaned forward. Tell me about your son. Her fingers twisted in her lap. He's 32. Army veteran. 2 tours in Afghanistan. He came back 5 years ago and, he hasn't been the same. Thomas Reeves lifted his head at that. The faintest frown formed between his brows. Caprio said gently, "Not the same how?" Ellen took a moment before answering. "He can't sleep. Jumps at sounds. Doesn't talk about anything real. He was living with me, but lately," she paused, voice faltering. "He stays out. A lot. I think he's ashamed." Reeves shifted again. He spoke quietly. "What's his name?" "Mark." The veteran nodded once, not to her, not to the judge, but to himself, as if something clicked into place. He exhaled slowly, rubbed the metal in his hand, and said nothing more. Caprio broke the silence. "Mrs. Mercer, you said one of the previous tickets wasn't yours. That it was your son's car that day?" "Yes. He'd borrowed it for a night shift. He promised he'd move it, but he fell asleep in the car. The police came, towed it before I even woke up. By the time I found out, it was too late." She laughed once, not from humor, but disbelief at the absurdity of her own story. "I thought, fine, another ticket. What's one more?" The judge sighed through his nose. "You took responsibility for it." She nodded. "He doesn't need one more thing hanging over him. He's already losing enough." There was a pause, then the veteran spoke, his voice rough, like gravel but steady. "Judge, I've seen that boy. Down by the memorial on South Street. He sits there late, quiet, doesn't ask for anything. I didn't know his name, but I knew that look. Same one we all get when we come home and can't find where we belong." Ellen covered her face with her hand for a moment. "He told me he goes there sometimes. Said it's the only place where nobody expects him to explain." Caprio folded his hands. His eyes softened in that way that wasn't pity, but recognition. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, "you've been taking his punishment on yourself, haven't you?" "I guess I have," she said. "It's easier to pay a fine than to fix a soul." He didn't respond right away. The gallery was utterly still, no coughs, no shuffling, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then the judge spoke, slowly, carefully. "You've been doing what mothers do," he said. "Carrying the weight so someone else can breathe. But sometimes, the weight needs both shoulders." He turned toward the veteran. "Mr. Reeves, I think you and I might be seeing two sides of the same coin. One man trying to forget the war, another woman trying to keep it from swallowing her family." Reeves gave a single nod. "Then maybe it's time someone helped her lift it." Caprio tapped the file lightly. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm not here to punish you today. I'm here to understand what the law missed." He paused. "Because this isn't about parking. It's about the spaces people get trapped in, the ones they can't leave, even when the sign says, 'reserved.'" Ellen stared down at her hands. Her voice was small. "I just didn't want him to be seen as another broken veteran." Caprio answered softly, "And now, maybe, we won't." He closed the file. "I'm taking a brief recess," he said. "Not because I need to think, but because I want to make sure the next step is worthy of the truth we just heard." As he rose, the gavel stayed still. He didn't need it. The sound that filled the room was silence, deep, unbroken, and full of something that wasn't judgment anymore, but understanding. Judge Caprio returned to the bench with the weight of silence following him. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, fingers resting on the edge of the file, "where is your son now?" She didn't lift her eyes. "I don't know, Your Honor." A breath caught in her throat. "Last time I saw him, he said he didn't want to be anyone's burden. Then he left." The judge exhaled slowly, closing the folder halfway. Around the room, no one spoke, just the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Then, from the front row, the veteran rose. Thomas Reeves. His movements were deliberate, as if every inch forward cost him thought. "Your Honor," he said, his voice roughened by restraint. "I need to say something." Caprio gestured gently. Go ahead, Mr. Reeves. I know where her son is. The words fell into the room like a dropped glass. A wave of murmurs rolled through the benches, then stopped when the judge lifted his hand. Explain, Caprio said quietly. I saw him last night, the veteran continued. At the war memorial. He was sleeping there, on the bench where we set our flags each year. He had his jacket pulled up, trying to stay warm. A sharp breath came from someone in the gallery. Ellen covered her mouth, shaking her head as if the air itself might argue. Caprio leaned forward, voice softened but waited. You didn't say anything to him? Thomas hesitated. I wanted to. But, we don't always talk, Judge. Men like him, men like me, we learn to keep our pain locked tight. We think silence is loyalty. Ellen began to cry quietly, not wailing but gasping, those short, trembling sounds of someone who has held it too long. The judge didn't interrupt. He simply waited. Finally, Reeves turned toward her. He's not gone, ma'am. He's lost. That's different. Then, looking back to Caprio, he said, let me pay her fine. All of it. But only if she promises to go find him. The judge's hand stilled on the gavel. He studied both of them for a long second, one man offering redemption, one woman drowning in guilt. Mr. Reeves, he said, the court doesn't accept heroism as currency. A pause, a faint lift of his brows. But maybe today we'll make an exception. No one breathed. The line wasn't delivered for effect, it was spoken as truth, plain, solid, unadorned. Ellen looked up, eyes swollen, face streaked. I don't need charity, she whispered. Reeves answered softly, it's not charity, ma'am. It's repayment. You raised a soldier who still fights, even if it's with himself. Caprio's tone grew firm again, though still quiet. This is no longer about parking violations. It's about people who stopped believing anyone sees them. He turned to the clerk. Hold the fine pending review. Then, to Ellen, you're going to look for him, Mrs. Mercer. Not as punishment. As purpose. Her head bobbed in a broken nod. Tears kept coming, but there was something steadier behind them now, resolve. The veteran eased back into his seat, hand tightening once more around that weathered metal. The sound of it brushing his jacket was barely audible, yet somehow louder than the entire room. Caprio set down his pen. This court stands adjourned until tomorrow, he said softly. Let's give everyone a night to find what they've lost. He didn't strike the gavel. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was verdict enough. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The same benches, the same wood-paneled walls, yet something in the air was charged, softer and heavier at once. People whispered as they entered, but when Judge Caprio took his seat, the sound faded like mist. On the front bench sat Ellen Mercer, hands clasped tight. She hadn't slept. Beside her was Thomas Reeves, the veteran's jacket folded neatly across his knees. Then, as the judge adjusted his glasses, the door creaked open. A figure stepped in, thin, pale, shoulders slightly bent beneath an old field jacket patched with a faded American flag. Ellen gasped. Jason. Her son stopped halfway down the aisle. The crowd turned, murmurs rippling again until Caprio's voice cut gently through them. Mr. Mercer, he said, please come forward. Jason approached the stand, moving like a man unsure the ground beneath him would hold. His voice was low, hoarse. I know why I'm here, Your Honor. My mother shouldn't be. Ellen's breath trembled. She whispered, please, but Caprio raised a hand softly. Let him speak. Jason kept his gaze on the bench. She's been paying for my mistakes. Those tickets, the fines, they're mine. I didn't ask her to, but she did it anyway. He paused, fighting to steady himself. When I came home from the war, I wasn't the same. Couldn't hold a job, couldn't sleep. I thought the best thing I could do was disappear. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable but not cold. And did disappearing help? Jason managed a dry laugh. No, sir. It just made her lonelier. A rustle passed through the room, not disapproval, not sympathy, just the collective sound of people breathing again. Thomas Reeves stood slowly. Your Honor, may I? Caprio nodded. The veteran walked toward Jason, stopping a few feet away. Their eyes met, one man haunted by battles past, the other by the war that came after coming home. I saw you by the memorial, Reeves said quietly. You looked like a ghost waiting for permission to come back to life. Jason's jaw tightened. Didn't think anyone noticed. I noticed, Reeves replied. Because I used to be that ghost. The two men stood in silence. The air between them was heavy, not with shame but recognition. Then Caprio's voice broke through, calm but weighted. Mr. Mercer, he said, you understand your mother could face penalties for what you've done. Yes, sir. And you? Jason hesitated. I'll take whatever's fair. The judge picked up the file, then set it down again. Fair isn't always equal, he said. Sometimes it's something better. He turned toward Ellen. Mrs. Mercer, you won't pay another dime. Your debt to this court, and to life, is already full. Ellen's lip quivered, but she stayed silent, eyes wet. Then Caprio looked to Jason. As for you, Mr. Mercer, I have one condition. You're going to work with Mr. Reeves, at his Veterans Outreach Center. You'll help other soldiers find their footing again. Start today. Jason blinked. You mean, community service? No, Caprio said, his tone firm but kind. Community restoration. There's a difference. A soft hum of approval spread through the gallery. Reeves gave a small nod, not of pity, but of invitation. Ellen covered her face, her shoulders shaking. The judge waited until she could meet his gaze. Mrs. Mercer, he said, voice lowering, your son's back now. Let him stand beside you, not behind you. Jason turned, knelt beside her, and took her hand. I'm sorry, Mom. She shook her head, whispering through tears, you're here. That's enough. The judge let the moment linger before speaking again. This courtroom has seen a lot of laws broken, he said. But maybe today we fixed one, the law that says pain must always end in punishment. He paused, then added, this case is dismissed. But the work, all of yours, begins now. As the gavel struck once, a ripple of applause filled the room. Not loud, not triumphant, the kind of applause that sounded like relief. Reeves placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. You'll be fine, kid. You just needed orders again. Jason nodded, almost smiling. Yes, sir. And behind them, Ellen Mercer closed her eyes, the first deep breath of peace in years rising and falling like a prayer finally answered. Weeks later, the courthouse was just another quiet building on a sunlit street. Life had returned to its rhythm, the shuffle of papers, the echo of shoes on marble floors, but something of that day still lingered there, like a faint aftertaste of grace. Outside the city's Veterans Center, a coffee machine hissed and clicked. The sound mixed with quiet conversation and the scrape of chairs. Inside, Ellen Mercer poured coffee into chipped mugs while her son Jason stacked folded blankets beside a wall painted with fading stars and stripes. Thomas Reeves was there too, sorting donations, his medal now hanging above the front desk, not as decoration, but as reminder. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a peaceful one. No courtroom tension, no fear of judgment, only small, steady gestures that said, we're still here. At one point, Ellen glanced through the window and smiled faintly. When I first walked into that courtroom, she said, I thought my life was ending. Reeves looked up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Funny thing about endings, he murmured. Sometimes they're just orders to turn the page. Jason didn't speak. He stood by the doorway, watching two younger veterans come in, one limping, the other pale and nervous. He greeted them, helped them sign in, guided them toward the coffee pot. For the first time in years, his posture was upright, steady. Ellen caught the look on his face, that quiet concentration, the hint of pride, and blinked hard, as if holding back tears. Reeves noticed too. "Told you," he said softly. He just needed a mission again. Later that afternoon, a reporter stopped by, asking about the Caprio case. She'd heard how the judge had dismissed the fines and wondered if it had stirred controversy. Reeves only shrugged. "If justice means punishing people just to prove we can, then yeah, it's controversial. But if it means helping them find their way back, then it's the most lawful thing I've ever seen." That quote made it into the local paper the next day. Judge Caprio, when asked for comment, said simply, "Justice isn't always about what people owe. Sometimes it's about what they still have left to give." The story spread quietly, no headlines screaming redemption, no viral clips, just whispers in coffee shops, churches, and town halls. People nodded when they heard it, as if reminded of something they already knew but had forgotten: compassion is still legal. One cold morning, Jason and Reeves stood together at the war memorial. A small crowd had gathered for Veterans Day. The stone gleamed, lined with tiny flags fluttering in the wind. Reeves reached into his pocket and handed Jason his medal. Jason frowned. "I can't take that." "It's not mine anymore," Reeves said. "I earned it for saving a soldier who'd given up." "Guess that happened twice." Jason swallowed hard, gripping the medal like a lifeline. "Thank you." Reeves smiled faintly. "Just promise me one thing: when you meet someone who's ready to quit, pass it on." Across the street, Ellen watched them from a bench, her hands clasped together. The same hands that had once clutched unpaid tickets now rested quietly in her lap. She wasn't the trembling woman from the courtroom anymore. She looked lighter, not because her problems were gone, but because she wasn't carrying them alone. The camera of imagination might linger here, on the flag's movement, the sound of footsteps fading, the hum of life continuing. Then, perhaps, a closing voice, calm, reflective, unmistakably Caprio's, saying, "There's a kind of justice that doesn't fit in a book of laws. You won't find it in fines or verdicts. It lives in the space where understanding meets mercy. And sometimes, the greatest thing a courtroom can do, is remind people they still belong to one another." A quiet pause. The faint echo of the city, wind, distant traffic, a child's laughter. Then, softly, the sound fades out, like a deep exhale after years of holding breath. No applause. No grand finale. Just peace, the truest verdict of all.